Government pledges to protect under 18s from e-cigarettes. The Prime Minister says he'll introduce measures to stop retailers in England giving free vape samples to children. But critics say it's not enough.
It's not that they are short of ideas, but the government is not taking them forward. I don't think they've gone far enough, and they've been a bit late to the. They've really been a bit late to the party on this one.
Well, there has been a sharp rise in the number of children who use vape. So, can the law catch up with the rapidly growing market? Also tonight. Asda's chief executive rejects plans for a voluntary price cap on some supermarket foods, saying it will never work. Still chasing Johnson's WhatsApp messages, the COVID inquiry delays the deadline until Thursday for the government to produce the evidence. And a total cover-up. Former colleague Eamon Holmes' allegations over the Philip Schofield scandal.
Those in authority had to know what was going on, and they thought they would dodge a bullet with this.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Prime Minister today announced a crackdown on vape companies targeting underage users. Rishi Sunak said there will be a review into rules around e-cigarettes, and retailers in England will be banned from giving free samples to children. Now, it is already illegal for under 18s to buy vaping products, but colourful packaging and enticing flavours have been blamed for a surge in teenagers trying them, sometimes with little knowledge of what they really contain. Kelly Foran reports.
Flavour-wise, sweet strawberry.
Strawberry ice, cola, almost every flavour that would appeal to young people, but are illegal for them to buy.
Have you brought any ID with you by any chance?
Yes, I have.
Vapes came to the market as a way to help smokers quit, but they've taken on a life of their own.
It's big business, this, isn't it?
You've suddenly found a plethora of stores that would have never sold vaping products suddenly make these available. And in many cases, whilst they sell age-restricted categories like alcohol or cigarettes already, unfortunately, they're not putting in place those disciplines to ensure they're only getting into the hands of adults.
Mad Blue.
Young influencers are promoting them on social media. Schools are having to put in vape detectors.
Some of them are particularly.
The Prime Minister was at this lab in Kent today where disposable vapes are being tested for corrupt chemicals, but their colourful packaging and flavours are causing just as much concern.
There are a range of products which are clearly not designed for adults. They're designed to appeal to children in the way that they're marketed, promoted, the flavours they use, and that's why at the moment we're asking for people's views on that, and that may well be one of the steps that we take to change how we regulate the marketing and promotion of vapes.
The government plans to close a loophole which allows free vape samples to be given to children. They'll look at increasing fines for shops selling illicit vapes, and they'll launch a review into the rules around the sale of nicotine-free products to under 18s. An anti-smoking campaign group believe it's too little, too late.
No, I don't think they've gone far enough, and they've been a bit late to the. They've really been a bit late to the party on this one. I mean, Ash has been calling for them to close some of these loopholes that they're talking about closing today for 2 years.
Cigarettes hidden behind the counter. Vapes are often found amongst chocolates and sweets, something the government is hoping will soon change. Kelly Foran, ITV News.
Well, our political correspondent Harry Horton is in Westminster tonight. Harry, the vape industry is a rapidly growing market, isn't it? Do you think the government is, in some senses, playing catch-up on this?
Well, there has been a big increase in the number of young people using e-cigarettes in recent years. An NHS survey 2 years ago found almost 1 in 10 young people admitted using e-cigarettes. That number is thought to be far higher now. These products have become cheaper, much more easily accessible. The government is catching up to an extent with regulating this industry. But look, the government is clear and the vaping industry is clear that there are some benefits to these products, especially when it comes to allowing people to quit smoking. So there is a a fine balance that needs to be struck here. Opposition parties have said the government needs to go much further. They've called for a ban on the use of single-use e-cigarettes. So Rishi Sunak is in a pretty difficult place here. Now, he personally has indicated that he's shocked at what he sees as the marketing of these products towards young people. He's hinted that he wants to go further than he has done today, but he is definitely under pressure from opposition parties and from some parents to not just go further, but to act much faster too.
Harry Horton at Westminster, thank you. Now, the chair of Asda has dismissed government suggestions of a price cap on some groceries. Lord Rose told ITV News that the voluntary scheme won't work and could even have unintended consequences. Now, it comes as the supermarket giant announced plans to buy 350 petrol stations from its sister company. And our business editor Joel Hills is at Asda in South London. Joel, what has Lord Rose been saying?
Well, look, Mary, prices in the supermarkets continues to rise at a blistering pace. The government wants to do more to support households, and one idea it has is to ask supermarkets to voluntarily agree to freeze the price of everyday essential foods. Supermarkets in France, interestingly, have agreed to do this. The chair of Asda says he won't, and not only that, but that a cap like this simply won't work.
I've been around in retail for a long time. We are a very efficient industry. Grocers are exceptionally good at what they do. I would warn any government of any complexion to be very, very careful about interfering with markets. Markets are funny things. They do what they want to do. And if once you start going and trying to interfere, you might get an unintended consequence. The government knows a lot about what it knows about, but it is not a shopkeeper. Leave shopkeeping to the shopkeepers and leave the politics to the politicians.
OK, Lord Rose, Stuart Rose there. And Joe, what do we know about today's takeover announcement? Because inevitably, unions are worried about job losses, aren't they?
They are. I mean, this deal effectively brings together Asda and the EG Group, which owns about 350 petrol forecourts up and down the UK and in Ireland. Two businesses owned by the billionaire Issa brothers. Stuart Rose absolutely insistent there will not be job losses. There are huge benefits to consumers as he sees it as they roll out convenience stores to all these petrol forecourts. It also helps, though, to enable EG Group to reduce its debts at a time of blisteringly high interest rate rises. Tonight, it's not clear, Mary, if the government thinks its voluntary price cap idea is still alive. You can understand the desire to do something, though. Food prices in the supermarkets 15% higher last month than they were a year ago. Lord Rose says food inflation has probably peaked, but he thinks it will be the end of next year before prices eventually stabilise. One last thing, MPs, unions have all accused the supermarkets of profiteering. The CMA thinks there's evidence that they've been overcharging for petrol and diesel. The chair of Asda dismisses these claims as nonsense.
Joel Hills in South London, thank you. Moscow was hit with drone attacks early this morning in what the Russian president called a terrorist act. He blamed the Ukraine for the strikes and is said to have caused only minor damage. But officials in Kyiv, itself bombed 3 times in the last 24 hours, deny any involvement. Let's get more now from our correspondent, Rachel Younger.
For a few fleeting seconds, the residents of one of Moscow's most upmarket suburbs got a glimpse of the fear felt every day in Kyiv. Captured from different angles on social media, this is one of what the Russian military say were 8 drones it shot down or jammed. On the ground, no serious injuries or damage, but it does shift the conflict onto Russia's streets. Its foreign ministry threatening to respond with the harshest possible measures. Its people, many of whom have been spared the dreadful reality of this war, possibly now feeling rather more vulnerable, as Vladimir Putin seemed to acknowledge.
Kyiv chose the path of intimidation of Russian citizens and attacks on residential buildings. It is a clear sign of terrorist activity. The Moscow air defense system worked satisfactorily. However, there is still work to be done to make it better.
It's only been a few weeks since the Kremlin was hit by a drone. With Russia blaming Ukraine, Kyiv rejects that and insists it wasn't involved in today's events either.
This could be anything from false flag operation to Russian groups acting inside Russia, to Russian military groups who have claimed responsibility for recent attacks on Russia. But what is clear is that Ukraine has nothing to do with this.
We cannot verify that, but what is beyond dispute is the incomparable scale of the air assault on Kyiv. Ukraine's capital hit harder than usual, more frequently than usual, in attacks more widespread than usual over the past few days.
You're happy that you've survived, but you're just wondering about what will happen next.
And so too is the rest of the world. This latest wave of strikes seems designed by Russia to deplete Ukraine's air defences ahead of a much anticipated counterattack. President Zelensky telling his people decisions have been made on the timing of when his troops will push forward, though he didn't say when. These are critical moments. Kyiv's suffering mounting again, along with fears that more attacks on Moscow might shift this war into new, dangerous territory. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
2 Italian spies and a retired Israeli agent are among 4 people who died when their boat sank on a lake in northern Italy over the weekend. The houseboat capsized when a sudden storm struck Lake Maggiore near the town of Lisanza. The 4th victim was a Russian crew member. Now, the COVID inquiry has told the government it must tell them where Boris Johnson's coronavirus WhatsApps and diaries are by 4 o'clock on Thursday. The inquiry wants to see unredacted messages, diaries and notebooks, all written by the former PM. But today officials claim they don't have all the material requested. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan explains.
Out running near his new home, Boris Johnson doesn't yet seem to have found where the T-shirts are kept. Of more consequence is whether he knows where his diaries and WhatsApp messages are. Last week, the government refused to give those to the COVID inquiry. Today, the government said they didn't actually have them. The Prime Minister insists they are being helpful.
Again, government's handed over tens and tens of thousands of documents in a spirit of candour and transparency, because it is important that we learn the lessons of COVID. With regard to the particular question at the moment, we're carefully considering next steps, but the government is confident in its position.
That position is that they will not hand over material, including Boris Johnson's COVID-era messages, that lawyers have determined are unambiguously irrelevant to the inquiry, and which might deter open discussion within government in future. But the former head of the civil service says that shouldn't apply this time.
I do see the need for decisions to be made in a way that they can feel that not everything they say or decide gets out in the normal course of events. But this isn't the normal course of events. This is the COVID inquiry. And I think in these circumstances, they have to be completely transparent.
4 o'clock today was the deadline set by the COVID inquiry chair for the Johnson material to be handed over. The new deadline is now 4 o'clock on Thursday. The government has until then to tell the inquiry where it thinks all this material is and what it has done to get hold of it. That in itself could be interesting, as Team Johnson has let it be known they haven't been asked for this material by the government. Dr. Natalie McDermott still suffers from long COVID. She says the inquiry must be given everything.
The whole purpose of the inquiry is for us to understand how decisions were made and what we can learn for the future or for future pandemics. And if we don't have all of the articles that are involved in us making decisions, then how can we possibly learn from that for future pandemics?
The families of COVID victims say the same, and if the government wants to resist the order to hand over all the material the inquiry is demanding, it may have to go to court to do so. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, there is plenty more still to come in the ITV Evening News, including the latest on the controversy this morning as MPs say they now want to question ITV bosses. And exactly what prompted these furious scenes at the country's most prestigious debating society. But before that, the police watchdog is investigating tonight after officers trained a taser on a 90-year-old woman in her own home and placed a spit hood over her head. She is said to have been left with cuts and bruises after being handcuffed. Well, Simon Harris is in South East London, where it all happened. Simon, what on earth happened here?
Mary, the woman at the centre of this, 90 years old, as you say, is well known to her neighbours as someone who suffers from dementia and often becomes confused, so they're very angry at what happened. Scotland Yard says officers went to her flat after reports of a disturbance involving the woman and her carer. And by their own admission, when they arrived, she was distressed. But for some reason, one of the officers pointed a taser at her, illuminating her with a red dot. And although the taser wasn't fired, she was handcuffed. And then a mesh hood known as a spit hood was placed over her head after she allegedly spat at one of the officers. She was then taken to hospital. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has launched an investigation, and a senior officer said while he didn't want to prejudge it, the officers know they must be able to justify any use of force or restraint. He also said they're expected to show compassion. One of them has been suspended, 5 others have been moved to restricted duties, and we understand, Mary, that the 90-year-old woman is now in a care home.
Simon Harris in South East London, thank you. Now, the former This Morning presenter, Eamon Holmes, has made blistering claims about ITV's flagship daytime show. He alleged that bosses knew about Philip Schofield's affair with a young colleague. Well, tonight, MPs have said that they will quiz ITV executives about the scandal when they appear at a parliamentary select committee next week. ITV didn't comment today, on screen or off, as Ellie Pitt reports.
Hello and welcome to your Tuesdays This Morning.
This Morning came on and off air today without a mention of the accusations being hurled at its management by former host Eamon Holmes. Even a potentially awkward moment handing over to his wife, presenter Ruth Langford,
Hi Ruth,
passed with professional politeness.
See you at 12:30.
After acknowledging the bitter row unfolding away from the cameras in yesterday's programme, today's strategy was to move on.
No, mate, you've had it all your way for too long.
Last night on GB News, Mr Holmes unleashed a catalogue of criticisms against Philip Schofield and his former employer ITV, including that despite their denials, channel bosses knew about Schofield's affair with a much younger male colleague.
It's a total cover-up. Those in authority had to know. They had to know what was going on, and they thought they would dodge a bullet with this.
Holmes hosted This Morning for 15 years before being, as he called it, dropped by the broadcaster. He says he didn't know about his colleague's relationship with the young runner, but has since been told there's evidence the teenager would come into work straight from Schofield's home.
He obviously stayed overnight, and there are records to show that he was brought in the next day separately.
In cars paid for by ITV?
In cars paid for by ITV.
So the management would have had to have known about that, wouldn't they?
Unless Philip paid the bill separately.
Schofield admitted last week that he'd lied about his affair with the young man and left ITV.
Bye.
He's since denied claims by former presenters Dr. Ranj and Eamon Holmes that This Morning was a toxic place to work. ITV is yet to comment on Mr. Holmes' allegations, but the broadcaster's executives will face questions from MPs about the show next week at a scheduled Media Select Committee meeting. But as tensions between its former presenters are played out in public, the controversy itself is at risk of becoming toxic. Ellie Pitt, ITV News.
In other news, 5 men have been jailed for illegally streaming Premier League matches to thousands of people. The gang was convicted after a rare private prosecution by the Premier League. The men made more than £7 million, charging customers a subscription, which gave them access to every live game. Workers at the homeless charity St Mungo's have begun a month-long strike in a row over pay. Unite members are staging pickets in Oxford, London, Bristol and Brighton after rejecting a 2.25% pay rise. And Casualty's longest-serving cast member, Derek Thompson, is leaving his role as Charlie Fairhead. He said after 37 years, it was time to hang up Charlie's scrubs. And the Prime Minister has backed a decision allowing a controversial professor to speak at Oxford University. Transgender students accuse Kathleen Stock of having hateful views and have succeeded in disrupting her speech tonight. Our correspondent Ben Chapman is there. Ben, how big have these protests been?
Well, there have been about 400 protesters here tonight, mostly members of Oxford University's LGBTQ+ society, and they've been making plenty of noise, as you can hear, right across the road from where this controversial event at the Oxford Union Debating Society has just finished. They wanted this event to be cancelled. They didn't succeed in that, but they did succeed in getting it suspended for a brief time when one of their number glued themselves to the floor inside the hall. This whole thing has sparked a debate about freedom of speech. The protesters object to the views of the main speaker tonight, Professor Kathleen Stock, an academic who they've accused of transphobia after she said that people who are male cannot be women. They've accused her of hate speech. This is what some of the protesters told me earlier.
It's the fact that the union has given her a platform simply because they knew it would be controversial.
The Oxford Union to have her as the headline name without any experts coming to counter her arguments, I think is really dangerous because it's just going to be giving a lot of essentially fake news to people.
Trans students are being made to attend the union and fight for their own rights if they want to challenge her. There's no guarantee that the union committee will ask her questions that are representative of us.
Well, Professor Stock arrived very cloak and dagger for this event this evening via a back entrance, security clearly a concern. She rejects that her views are hate speech, and she said that controversial and difficult views need to be tested in the public sphere, and that's a view that has been echoed by the Prime Minister as well, who supported this event taking place tonight.
Ben Chapman in a very noisy Oxford, thank you. Now, around 150 sailors and Royal Navy officers who played a role in the late Queen's funeral have been presented with medals as a thank you from the King. Among those honoured was Medical Assistant Paisley Chambers-Smith, one of the naval ratings, who pulled the gun carriage carrying the Queen's coffin. She wore a summer dress for the occasion, as there is no Royal Navy ceremonial maternity uniform. Now, you may have seen on our programme on Saturday night or read over the weekend some desperately sad news about our brilliant colleague and dearly loved friend, Emily Morgan. Emily was our health and science editor, and she died on Friday after a short illness. During the weekend, there have been thousands of messages of sadness and support for Emily's family, including from the Chancellor and the Health Secretary, as well as ITV News viewers up and down the country. We're ending tonight's programme with the reflections of somebody who knew Emily well, our colleague Tom Bradby, who worked with Emily during her 23 years at ITV News. Good evening.
And to you, she will be familiar to many, if not all of you.
This has been a bit of a miracle for you, hasn't it?
As our health editor, Emily Morgan became a household name during the dark days of the pandemic.
Unsurprisingly, every single bed in this ICU ward is taken up with a patient.
If the sheer volume of time spent on COVID wards exposed her to a degree of risk, she was always clear as to why she was doing it.
That was the reason we went in. We had a duty to do that as journalists, to report firsthand on the ground.
Over more than a decade, her reporting on health and politics and much else besides was marked out by its clarity, its style, charisma, compassion and basic humanity.
Are you going to be okay?
Yes. Just so dry. Stiff upper lip. I mean, has there been a moment where you've woken up in the morning and thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? The last few days have been a disaster.
She actually began her career as a producer, working behind the scenes. For 5 years at Westminster, we worked together every day as we crisscrossed the globe on planes and trains and automobiles after Blair and Brown and Cameron and many others besides. She was brilliant at her job, it's true, but she was also incredibly funny and completely irreverent. I once persuaded our editor to send us across Canada by train with cameraman Rob Turner to make a film on how the Canadians cut the deficit. Emily referred to this ever afterwards in front of the senior management as our holiday in Canada with Rob. Like many a friendship born at work, it was full of the talk of the joys of home. We watched her fall in love, get married, have 2 wonderful daughters. She must have had her faults. We all do. But we didn't see them. In the 33 years I've been here, I'm not sure I've witnessed too many people more popular in this newsroom. We are devastated because we really loved her. And if you'd known her, you would have too.
Good evening to you. Like today, split conditions as we slide through the rest of this week and into a new month. Cool, breezy and cloudy for some, for others, sunny and pleasantly warm. And like last week, that huge area of high pressure in control, keeping things settled, quiet, fine and dry. Not always sunny, with a good deal of cloud across central and eastern zones, together with quite a chilly breeze from the North Sea. Temperatures a little lower than we'd like given the time of year. Further west, more sunshine and temperatures doing a little better. As for the next few hours, clearer skies to end the day across the north and the west, temperatures soon sliding away. The cloud cover remains further east, and this becoming a little extensive overnight. Where we've got the clearer skies, better, brighter conditions into the first stages of Wednesday morning once early mist and murk lifts. Elsewhere, disappointingly grey from the word go. We've got a really extensive cloud into the new day initially. Quite cool and fresh feeling, the chilly feel enhanced by that brisk breeze from the east. But where the cloud has nibbled away, that sunshine making all the difference. Highs of 22 or 23 degrees, the temperatures peaking across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. A really lovely day here. Where we've got the cloud, a much cooler, fresher day ahead, particularly around those eastern coasts with that chilly breeze. Into Thursday, a similar theme, a day of contrast with the cloud cover across those central and eastern spots and that brisk breeze from the North Sea. Temperatures on the lower side, a cooler feel to the day. Elsewhere, the sunshine lifting temperatures to 22 or 23 degrees. See you soon.